Hello viewers, I am Mushahid Hussain from Islamabad, Pakistan, and I am delighted to present another episode of Global South Voices, the program of the Global South on behalf of CGTN, which is China's premier television channel for the world. Global South Voices is meant to present a perspective for our views all over the world based on the lenses, the worldview of the Global South, which is today the world's majority. 2024 marks 75 years of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And since that period of China's liberation in 1949, there has been a huge transformation of China from a poor country to today being the second largest economy in the world, having lifted 800 million people out of poverty in this short span, which is an unprecedented achievement in the annals of human history. And today, China is fueling 30% of global growth through its economy. To discuss various dimensions of China's rapid rise and its implications for the global south and the world, today we have a distinguished and diverse panel from different parts of the world discussing these issues. We have from Lahore, Pakistan, a very eminent economist, a former finance minister of Pakistan, Dr. Salman Shah. We have from Beijing, Dr. Wang Wen, who is executive dean of the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies at the Renmin University in Beijing. We have from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Sri Ong Tee Keat, who is president of the Belt and Road Initiative Caucus on Asia Pacific. And we have from Pretoria, South Africa, a very eminent lady who is a leading expert on Africa-China relations, and she is also the director of the Stadio Higher Education. So I'll start from Dr. Salman Shah in Lahore. Dr. Sahab, how do you see China's rapid rise? And what do you think are the reasons for such an rapid rise that in a period which started in 1978 especially, China's reform and opening up under the great leader Deng Xiaoping to 2023, that China recorded continuously an average of 9% growth, and which is tremendous by any standards. And now we see China in the front ranks of the global economy. So what do you attribute are the reasons for this rapid rise?
What I'm saying is now we can see that President Xi is giving a new direction to this economic system of China, and that direction is that they have to get into what he calls high quality development. High quality development means mastering the technology and the systems of the new economy, global economy, which is going to be based on artificial intelligence and the whole value chains of semiconductors and electric vehicles and solar energy and green energy and the minerals which are needed for that. So China is now systematically trying to get a kind of a leadership role in this very important area of our future economy. And so bringing in the resources of China, bringing in the science of China, bringing in the management experience of China, and making this new dimension in the economy, the artificial intelligence dimension. China is becoming the leader in terms of the economic growth going forward. So I think the Chinese system and the way it has evolved and reformed is in a very good position to actually take China into a leadership role. In fact, it will be the biggest economy of the world, and it will continue to be a very innovative economy, and it will be at the cutting edge of almost all sectors of the economy. And this, we know, this all started when the Chinese really started to reform the rural economy, and they created the incentives which fueled the growth in the rural economy and then in the urban economy.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Salman Shah, because you brought out a good historical linkage between the reform and opening up done by Deng Xiaoping with the current day situation where President Xi Jinping has talked of innovation and high quality development, and especially how this uh, progress of China's economy spawned the notion of common prosperity, which is now you can see everywhere. And I will now move on to Dr. Wang Wen in Beijing. And Dr. Wang Wen, you heard the perspective from one of China's closest friends, Pakistan, a neighboring country, and an expert from Pakistan. So, how do you, as somebody who is also a leading expert based in Beijing, see China's rapid rise and the reasons for that? And I would just like to add that on a personal note, I remember when I first went to China in the early 70s as a young teenager from Pakistan heading a youth friendship group about 50 years ago. It was a different kind of China. And I've been fortunate to see this transformation of China from a poor country, a less developed country, to a country that is now in the front ranks of technology and economic development. Dr. Wang Wen.
So actually, I think the most important factor for China's continuous economic growth for 45 years is reform and opening up. And this is a very key element. Uh, as we all know that through reform, the Chinese government has greatly unleashed social vitality and a market-oriented flow of production factors, greatly increasing the driving force of economic growth, push the total social and economic change, as you mentioned in the past half century, such as real estate, automobiles, manufacturing, and so on. And on the other hand, through opening up to the outside world, China attracts foreign investment, integrates into economic globalization, and promotes domestic economic growth by leveraging the favorable international environment. So I think this is a very important uh, uh, internally reform and outside opening up. Of course, I think to achieve the success of reform and opening up policy in the past uh, 45 years, we need a stronger leadership, which is CPC, as we all know, Communist Party of China. In China, we know, but some Western opinion or Western think tank, Western media, they cannot believe in. So I think we need more and more international friends to understand China's economic growth logic. I think it's not very easy, but we try our best to explain the logic of the past 45 years economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move on to Dr. Farhana Paruk in Africa. Dr. Farhana, as you know, that China and Africa have a very close relationship, and their development has been inextricably intertwined, not in the recent past, but in the last, I would say, over 50, 60 years, because China was the first country to support African liberation movements, then support African development and build projects. And today also, China and Africa have this very close camaraderie. So you are based in South Africa. How do you view China's rapid rise, and what do you see as some of the causes, and how do you see also the notion of common prosperity being spread around, not just in China, but across in Africa as well?
I think that, as you've mentioned correctly, we have a long historical relationship with China, especially South Africa fighting apartheid. China stood by us. But I think for Africa, we see China as a role model, and I think when we as Africans look at what China has achieved in that short period in terms of infrastructure development, it's absolutely amazing. And then I think the other key factor is the education and the human capital development. China has invested enormous amounts on education, which has, in the long term, really has benefited the economy and as a result of that, they've moved up the value chain in terms of high tech and in terms of able to compete in technology, etc., with the West at a far exceeding pace. So I think those are some of the key factors that really where Africa has really learned. And I think the relationship is also that China sees Africa as part of assisting in that development process, and that where other countries has kind of extracted resources from Africa, but not has played a role in developing. And we see that right throughout many parts of Africa in terms of infrastructure expertise, in terms of advisory capacity.
Thank you, Dr. Farhana. And I think you said it very aptly that Africa sees China as a role model, and China also sees Africa as an equal partner in development based on a relationship that is a win-win cooperation and reciprocity. And unlike some countries in the West which have had, as you said rightly, an extractive relationship with Africa, and it's been a one-way side of exploitation of resources, unlike China, which has built up Africa's development for the people of Africa. Now I'd like to move on again to, thank you, to Dr. Salman Shah. Dr. Salman Shah, there are contrasting views about China's development, China's rapid rise. Some in the West are critical and skeptical. They say China's rise is linked, and there was a reference made to that also by Tansri, to China's accession to the WTO in 2001. And they say that while China got the benefits of that membership and that accession, but in return, China did not fully fulfill its commitments to open its markets to the outside world. And then, of course, there is this contrasting view between what we feel is the Chinese economic miracle versus talk in certain quarters in the West, which is quite recurrent, that about China's economic collapse. Of course, the doomsday scenarios are always there, and many of them are spawned by geopolitics and ideology rather than by ground realities. So your take on that, Dr. Salman Shah?
I think it's a very robust system of making economic decisions based not on ideology, but on the basis of the market. And that is a very powerful kind of atmosphere in which Chinese companies are operating, in which innovation is taking place, in which the government and the partnership with the corporate sector and with the public sector and the private sector, all of them are now fully functional in China, and they are playing an outstanding role in the economic growth and economic innovation in China. So I think the reaction of the West is that, number one, they are very surprised by what has happened. Number two, they find that they cannot compete with China on an even playing field. Recently, I was in China, and I was told that they have opened a free trade zone just on the Pakistan border. And what it means is that any Pakistani enterprise can go and set up a sale point over there, and they can just go and make their sales in the Chinese market. Other than that, we need to have a lot of collaboration with the enterprises in Pakistan and enterprises in China, so that we can benefit from this great opportunity which is at our doorstep. So I think Pakistan is fortunate that we have a land link with China. We have the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a very well-designed logistics project, and I think from Gwadar port into Chinese Western China, into Central Asia, also into Eurasia from Gwadar. So I think this linkage is going to develop more and more, and that's where the Belt and Road Initiative also comes in. So I think, in a way, this whole atmosphere being created about that China is somehow going to be very bad for us is absolute nonsense. And I think one should not fall into this trap. Our relationships, economic and political and social, and the people of Pakistan support total integration of the economies of China and Pakistan. So I think this is the way it will be in the future as well. So I am not concerned about whether Chinese economy is going to collapse or not. What I am looking at is that Chinese economy is going to be the engine of growth for the global economy, at least in the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Dr. Salman Shah. And you have very forcefully debunked some Western mythology regarding the Chinese economy, especially this talk of, in abstract, I would say, of so-called collapse, because you said, and I think you rightly told the West, stop worrying about China, start benefiting from China. And as you said rightly, the China's economy would be the engine of growth for the global economy. And those who are critical basically is because they are not able to compete with China. And China today is spearheading globalization, I think very aptly put. Now I move on to Dr. Wang Wen. Dr. Wang Wen, you also mentioned in your earlier response about the demonization of China. And we see that the demonization is going on a bigger scale because of geopolitics, because of a Cold War mindset, because of talk of containment, and as Dr. Salman Shah rightly put, a failure of the West to compete with China in the economy. So how do you see this process of demonization and this talk of, sometimes they talk of Chinese collapse, sometimes they talk of China's overcapacity. So there has to be something wrong somewhere, although China has a steadfast growth and while leading the globalization effort on all fronts. Dr. Wang Wen.
Actually, in the West, so-called China collapse is often popular. I think there at least are three main reasons. Firstly, as we talk about right now, when they study China, they often use Western economic logic. They always see the China's economic risks. But the problem is that they didn't see the China often digesting risks through development and growth. The second reason is that the bias or prejudice against the China ideology. They always not believe that the Chinese people can achieve success. And I think it's a kind of discrimination against China. Those discrimination exist for 100 years. That's a second reason. They cannot believe, cannot trust the country 100 years ago, or even a half century ago. The country, the people were so poor, but now they become richer and rich. They make change so many change. So they cannot believe. They still use those old eyes to see the Chinese with yellow skin, those people. I think this kind of discrimination. The third reason is that I think it's as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, the cursing or the speculating on China's feeling. They hope to cause China's collapse through suppression or containment policy. So I think those the demonizing media policy, I think they will be sure to fail. I think the ultimate result is that China would not collapse, but so-called China collapse theory will be collapse. China will developed continually, and we will achieve more and more progress step by step.
Thanks for that. Sri Ong Tee Keat, how do you see this so-called collapse theory, which we have discussed, and how do you see the way forward with China is developing and this Western critique of China or Western skepticism of China's economy? Is it well-founded or is it ill-founded, or it has no basis in reality?
And to me, this is nonsense. This is simply non-applicable. In the case of China being allowed to join WTO, as China owes no nation any gratefulness for the WTO membership. In hindsight, certain quarters in the West were still bitter with, if not regretful of, the then decision to allow China coming on board of WTO, more because they made a misjudgment. I call that a misjudgment, thinking that China would ultimately embrace the Western model of capitalist democracy after having been linked to the global trading system. But on the contrary, China did not evolve as what they desired. Instead, the unimpeded passage to WTO in turn facilitated China in making leaps and bounds in its economic development, ultimately making the US feel threatened, albeit China has time and again declared that it has no intention or whatsoever to challenge the US primacy. Mr. Chairman, well, I know that time is running short, and if I may just shift to the China's collapse theory, the myth of China's collapse actually has never ceased to be the obsession among the doomsayers of China. And some remain recalcitrant, not to accept the reality that China could ever become an economic power, as they believe that is only possible through the so-called democratic governance. They hold the view that the Chinese economic miracle is transient and China is a pseudo market economy at best. And I see no reason why China must dance to their tune. And of course, so far they have been talking about China is going to collapse since the early 1990s, if I can remember. 1990s until now, but whenever they talk about China's collapse, what we can see in reality is China continues to make leaps and bounds in economic performance. So we have no reasons to worry about what they want to say. Thank you.
Well put. As you said rightly, Tansri, there's a yawning chasm between opinions peddled in the West and the ground realities, where despite all the skepticism and doomsday scenarios, China continues to advance by leaps and bounds, as you rightly put it. Dr. Farhana, how do you view this Western perspective, demonizing China, talking of China's economic collapse, or raising questions while the facts are contrary to their opinions? Dr. Farhana Paruk in Pretoria, South Africa.
So from an Africa perspective, I think that the trade has been a huge advantage for us. We within Africa, where access to consumer products was extremely expensive from the West, China has now enabled people from lower to middle class income able to purchase a washing machine to a 10 rand to a t-shirt at a very low cost, and that has been really a game changer for us in many ways. And just also the accessibility now on the e-commerce has really made access to products and consumables, and has in that sense has actually enabled Africa to advance in many ways. So from my point of view, that's certainly on the trade issue. It's a huge advantage to have China and have access to that market, and I think many Western countries are very threatened by that. You can see that in the US, they have kind of looked at Africa and now realize that we are losing a very important market, and they have kind of many Western countries, especially the US, has come to Africa and have warned and created the doom scenario about China being an exploitive relationship with Africa. So I think that rivalry has, the policy of Africans now is, hey, we want to go east because of what advantages they offer. In terms of the collapse theory, I think if you really look at how China has, during the pandemic, has actually managed to sustain themselves, and secondly, it still manages to have a higher growth rate in comparison to many other economies. And that, I think this doomsday scenario is just part of the sort of Western propaganda to kind of create that China is the boogeyman and the ills of society, of the global economy.
Thank you very much. And I think we've had a very substantive and comprehensive discussion on the miracle of China's rapid rise in the last past decades, especially after the reform and opening up, which started in 1978. And we have seen that especially this miracle is evident in poverty alleviation. 800 million people lifted out of poverty in such a short span, which has no precedent in human history. And all the participants agree that China's economy will continue to be an engine of growth for the global economy, notwithstanding the demonization from certain quarters in the West, because that demonization stems from a mindset that cannot accept the peaceful development of non-Western economies. And it also stems from some kind of discrimination and double standards. I would also like to mention that I was reading some time back, a few years back, I remember, an article in the New York Times which sums up the Western mindset about China. And they had a special edition in the New York Times marking the anniversary of the reform and opening up. And an American expert was saying that when the reform and opening up started in 1978 under Deng Xiaoping, China talked of socialism with Chinese characteristics and opening up through and reform through the market economy. And they said that we felt this is impossible. How can it be possible? And this is an experiment which is bound to fail. And the American expert said, we just have to wait. And then the New York Times wrote, which is the punchline, that 40 years later, we are still waiting. And I think that sums up how ignorance can be there about China's realities and China's development. And finally, I'd like to say about China's role in spearheading globalization. I think President Xi Jinping put it very well in his speech in Davos in 2017. And he said that anybody who opposes globalization, it's being like locked in a dark room. And I think that sums up the worldview, the mindset of many in the West who are today opposing globalization because they want to oppose China. So our advice to them is, please come out of that dark room and be a partner in development and building a better, peaceful and prosperous tomorrow for the entire humanity. Thank you very much, and this brings us to the end of this episode. We thank all our distinguished guests from all parts of the world for their proactive participation, which really added a lot of substance and gravitas to the discussion. And you can all find us on CGTN app, on X, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And please stay tuned to Global South Voices because this is CGTN's debut program for the Global South, presenting a different perspective about the huge transformation taking place in the world today. Till we meet again, see you next time. Thank you.